Here in America, we are feeling more of the price increases and the inflation there, and maybe a shortage of certain things. But when it really comes down to it, are we ready for food insecurity? The reason I'm bringing it up is we're going to talk about 5 things today that could really spark a true food famine, a true insecurity of food. And why we always tell you to prepare is really based on these 5 things. Now, of these 5 things, you're going to notice a lot of these are starting to come true and come to fruition. Because they're coming to fruition, what does that mean? That means we are closer and closer to more global insecurity of food. I think when we start seeing that more and more, I believe we're going to see more and more panic and more societal issues that could cause crises. Also, we'll see a lot of countries with starvation issues, which will cause migration issues. It definitely is a chain reaction. We're going to talk about 5 sparks to a situation where we will see more food insecurity. And when we see more food insecurity, we will see more global chaos. This is why we encourage start building a prepper's pantry, start growing your own food, and try to be as sustainable as possible. Let's jump into this list. I think it can be eye-opening and hopefully gain some wisdom. This video starts right now. Hey guys, welcome to the Max. Thank you so much for being here today. If you're new to our channel, I do ask you to go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I'm okay with that, but let us know what you think about this video. Our goal is never to show you fear. Our goal is to open your eyes to things that are going on around the world, and hopefully you can see the importance of prepping or sustainable living or homesteading and making sure you're doing something about your food and how your family makes it in this crazy time. So let's jump into it. So number 1 is a dwindling insect population. Now here's the kicker. It's not just insects in general. There's a bunch of spiders. Like right now, I just killed a spider. I don't like spiders, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pollinators. We're starting to see our pollinators not be in populace and their numbers be down across the world. Now, how they find that in the studies, I don't know. I don't know if they're checking apiaries. I don't know if they're looking at what's getting pollinated and what's not. But because we're seeing overspray and because we're seeing crops that are not needing cross-pollination because they've been manufactured in a different way and manipulated and things like that happen. And you're seeing more processed food and not natural whole foods. You're seeing the pollinators be in shortage. Now, the scary thing about that is, how do we grow food without pollinators? Well, we can't. Sad thing is we're seeing more food being produced. It's being produced in warehouses. We're seeing more manipulation of food. I was thinking about this the other day. I walked down a grocery aisle, and of all the groceries that were on that aisle, I don't think anything was actually fresh. Most of it was boxed and prepackaged and literally had an expiration date on it for like 2 years. Sometimes that could be scary. As a prepper, I want to put up good quality food and make sure that I'm putting it up to have calories, but I want good sustenance. I want to make sure my family's being protected. I don't want just trash food. Studies show that 50 to 60% of all food in grocery stores are fully processed. Think of our generations of kids who are being raised on fully processed trash food. We may have food, but what kind of food quality are we having? I think that goes back to the pollinators, not having true pollination, not having food grown naturally, and then making it to our dinner table. This is one thing that's going to cause major food insecurities, because we need real food, first of all, but then we also need those pollinators taking care of their parts of the job. As we plant, as we harvest, the pollinators are a big part of that. So I think the more we see pollinator issues, the more we're going to see true food being decreased, and then we're going to see more processed food and more GMO foods on the rise. And I have a lot of people that kick back and say, well, what's wrong with GMO crops? It's feeding the world. That's a broad statement, though. Is it feeding the world? Is it making the world healthier? Or is it making us more dependent on maybe medicines and other treatments because of all the trash that we're putting in our body? So I push back on that and say, we're not really feeding the world. Yes, we're making food, but it's not really quote-unquote food. It may be processed and garbage that we call sustenance and we call calories, but they may not be the calories that we're actually needing. I think we're seeing a lot more health problems that way. Number 2. This is something we heard about years ago in history with a kind of like the Dust Bowl, but it's the erosion of our topsoil. It's also the over-treatment of our topsoil. So we have fertilization, we have tillage, and so therefore we're manipulating the soil and also causing that soil to slough off based on what we're putting in it and what we're doing to it. The more we till, and again, I'm guilty of it. There's some spots of our gardens that we do till because we put cover crops in them. But the more that we till, the more that we're hurting what's in the soil, the natural ecosystem. So we're killing our earthworms, that natural soil structure, by tilling it. And all the while we're putting chemicals in it that's gonna disrupt, and we're hoping to help grow crops, of course, but we're disrupting its natural ecology, its natural fertilization. Here we try to work so hard in preparing our ground in a back to Eden style, lasagna style, where we're just adding to, but also trying to fertilize in a way that is holistic. So therefore, it's going to take more work for us to do that. But I believe if we don't start taking more protection of our soil, more protection of our earthworms, more protection of the main level that we're growing in, we're going to see something like we saw with the Dust Bowl. We're going to see crops not being able to be grown because it's been so manipulated by tillage and by all the additives that we've put in it. It's going to cause issues over time. We're seeing that a lot of our topsoil and a lot of these chemicals and even some of the good fertilization is going into our waterways. Our waterways are then going out to the Gulf, and therefore we're losing all the benefits of the good stuff, and all the while we're putting chemicals into the water system that's going out to the Gulf, that's causing issues with all the ecology and fish and so forth in the rivers and then into the ocean. So it scares me to say, okay, we're losing topsoil based on trying to take care of the world. It's kind of like the GMO crops. So the more that we manipulate the ground, the topsoil, the more that we till into it, we're trying to grow crops, but all the while I think that we are trying to be proactive, and all of a sudden we're actually causing more issues. So is tillage bad? Is fertilization bad? I don't believe in conventional fertilization. And I don't actually believe in tillage if you don't have to. We actually have gotten to where we're going to start planting in our cover crop and trying to really get away from tillage. We raise about 13,000 square foot gardens here at our property. We're only tilling about 2,000 or 3,000 of that, and we actually this year kind of just said, you know what, I'm just done with it, because we believe that it's breaking down our soil too much, and therefore I feel like we're saying we're taking the easy way out by tilling, but actually we're breaking our soil down so much that it's actually making it either rock hard because we're losing our topsoil, or we're killing the natural ecology. So is it bad? I'm not saying it's bad or not. I don't know your situation, but what I am saying is because of that, we're going to see food insecurity, and we're going to see food problems and food growing because we're not going to have the topsoil to grow in. Which brings me to my third point. When we talked about fertilizers, there is a fertilizer shortage. There is issues with fertilizer. Is either increase in price that you can't afford. There's been a lot of farmers that have struggled growing crops because of that. And then also the fact that because we're tilling, because we're tearing up our ground, all the natural ecology is gone. We're trying to deplete the soil as much as we can to grow as much crops as we can. And therefore we're having to over-fertilize these grounds. So fertilization as a whole, conventionally, to me is actually a bad thing. We're not letting nature fertilize. We're not using natural fertilizers. We're putting this chemicalized fertilizer in the ground. Not only that, the cost of that fertilizer has went up tremendously. So for the people who believe in it, who say, I've got to fertilize the hay, I've got to fertilize for the grass for the cows, I've got to fertilize for all these gardens to be growing, it's going to make all your food system cost more anyway. So whichever way you're looking at it, it's going to cause food insecurity. It's either going to cause the price go up because you believe in conventional fertilization, or it's going to make you turn away from it because of all the dangers of it, and therefore food won't grow as quick because we've not prepared the soil to grow. For instance, I have two areas of corn. One is right where chickens were. That corn is standing as tall as me, and it still has about 5 to 6 weeks of growing time. However, I have another set of corn that's a brand new garden that I tilled up. It's been about 3 years old, but we've not done any conventional or unnatural fertilization. It's all been natural, and it's getting better each and every year. But because I'm tilling, because I'm trying to help it out with cover crop and all these things, it's not growing the production that the other is. So therefore, we're either going to see less production because we're growing more organic, or more cost because of the fertilization that we're using, and also the fact that it is in shortage because of all the wars and supply chain issues. That's a major ordeal. And fertilizing, no matter if you believe it or not, will cause food insecurities. I don't like GMO crops. I don't like fertilization. But because so many people are not growing their own gardens, so many people are not taking care of their own food situations, they depend on GMO crops. They depend on fertilizers to make it because they depend on someone else to feed them. That's going to cause food insecurity and a problem that I don't know if any government is ready for. A starving populace. And you're going to see that, or you're going to see more processed food. And I use food, the quote unquote food the GMO version of it, the warehouse versions of it. When we start seeing the overly processed food, you're going to see more health issues, and you're going to see people feeding their body full of wasted calories that are not valuable to their body to sustain. Whew. It's tough. And that brings me to number 4, the supply chain issues. We live in a globalist society. I believe that we need to do trade across the world, but I do not believe in the globalist movement and the globalist agenda to make America weaker and make us dependent on everyone else. Well, we've become that across the world. Because of that, we've seen where we depend on farmers to grow all across the world to feed the rest of the world. If it be corn from certain areas, if it be wheat from certain areas, if it be any other kind of grain or any other kind of meat that's going across the world, instead of America taking care of itself, or instead of really your local community taking care of itself. People are not growing food anymore. So therefore, we depend on that supply chain. Well, we've seen issues with shipping. We've seen issues with oil. We've seen issues with freight. We've seen issues with trucking because of the cost of moving goods. We saw this in 2020. We saw this with the lockdowns, how those supply chain issues, you couldn't find certain things on the shelf when you went to the stores. Now, that was scary. But let's say it gets 10 times worse. Let's say we have another shutdown. We have another hiccup that we're not ready for, and we're all less secure because our money is more inflated and because we see wars across the world. All that will throw a major kink in supply chain issues. Adversaries, and everybody's competing for the same goods. And so since we're not having the best relationship with some of the people of the East and maybe some of the BRICS countries, what are we going to do when all of a sudden we depend on their grain or they depend on something from us? That adversarial relationship will not help. So supply chain is a big deal. Yes, do we need people eating and we need people not starving across the world? I can't believe we're even having this conversation. But we're also paying farmers not to grow. And we're also not incentivizing people to grow their own food. So when a government is not incentivizing people to grow, when they're also closing down big farms, and that's not just in America, that's across the world, such as the Dutch farmers. We saw the freight issues in Canada. We see the freight issues here in America. We see the war in Ukraine. All those things will cause major supply chain issues, which will be one of the stepping stones of food shortage and also chaos when it comes to food insecurity. And number 5 is one of the things that you really can help. It's true weather issues. I go back to scripture always when I talk about Joseph, and I say this all the time. Joseph prepped and he prepared to take care of the people of Egypt and also the people of the world and really his own family back in Israel. No matter if you're a Bible-believing Christian like I am, it is wise to see what he did. He said, okay, he saw in a vision that it was going to be bad, so then he prepped. Now, I hope, again, our prepping is more insurance, but to be honest with you, it's really just food security for my family, and it's safety and security for my family. If we learn to put up food and we do as much as we can when it comes to stockpiling or growing as much as we can, it allows us not to have to be faced with issues kind of like what I'm talking about with weather. For instance, we had a bad plum and blueberry season because we had a colder spring. I mean, like hard freeze, something we've never seen in the South, in Mississippi, especially in the spring when things are blooming. However, we've had tons of plum and tons of blueberries put up from last year. Also, our strawberries are coming in really good this year because of all of a sudden the rains we've gotten. We've prepared based on past seasons because we know some seasons may not be as good as others. Our potato harvest was not as good last year as it was the year before, so we overplanted this year. We also had sweet potatoes planted because weather played a huge part of that. So say, for instance, you're not prepping, and all of a sudden we have a major famine, we have a major drought. California may go through a time where it doesn't have any kind of rains. All of a sudden they had a water issue not too long ago where they wouldn't let people water as much. All that is playing into the shortages that we're seeing now. So now if we see a bigger weather event, which does tend to happen across the world, it will cause more issues for our food insecurity. Now, of all the 5 that we've talked about, this is the one that we can't really project. We can't actually control as much. However, if we learn to prepare, like I said with Joseph, you'll be prepared for the bad years with the good years and how you've put up food. So I go back and I challenge you. These 5 reasons are reasons that we may see food insecurity. Several of these are already happening. We're seeing insect populations down. We're seeing supply chain issues. We're seeing how bad it was when the lockdowns were going on. We see the wars that are causing issues with global trade. All that is playing into food insecurity or the price of food. I don't believe in fertilizers or GMO crops. However, they're being used to feed a lot of people. So if all of a sudden we see shortages of fertilizers or the cost of that going up, that means the cost of the junk food is going to be more expensive. The cost of the fast food is going to be more expensive, or those things won't be there. It all is a chain reaction. So my challenge to you is to be growing and understand these 5 things. I'd say sparks can cause catastrophic food shortages or food insecurities across the world. What do people tend to fight over when they go to war? Money, power, and livelihood. It's food. It's taking care of our families. The reason we saw that in history was they may be fighting over grains and salt. It may be gold. It may be oil. All that's commodity-based. All that stuff dealing with how we live our life. Well, food is something we have to have each and every day. You don't believe we'll see chaos with food? We will. These 5 things, pay attention to, because they're already starting to happen, so it should make you want to prepare even more. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about this video. Our goal is not to scare you, it's to inform you to see what's really happening around us. It is so easy to just get entangled and have anxiety and stress and kind of be overwhelmed with all the talk of the elections and everything going on in America and across the world. But don't be discouraged. Don't be bamboozled at the same time. Don't think everything's perfect, because it's not. And start taking care of your family, preparing by buying things or growing things as much as you can. So that way when these things really take off and these sparks really ignite, they won't affect you as much. Focus on what's in front of you, taking care of your family, building true good food that is good quality calories, because if we allow everybody else to feed us, do you honestly believe we're getting the best quality food that we can get? I doubt it. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, please go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell. It does help us to stay in the algorithm. And let us know. Comment below what you think and what you're doing to help these situations. Are you growing bees? Are you growing vermiculture? Are you growing worms? Are you adding to your gardens? Are you doing less tilling? Are you trying to do more natural fertilizers with, rabbits and chickens? What are you doing to help your own food security? Let us know below. Guys, thank you so much for watching. God bless. Happy homesteading.